Good afternoon. Welcome to the NIWeek 2007 Industry Experts Panel on Breakthrough Innovation. I'm Hillary Marchbanks. I'm part of the corporate communications team here at NI, and first I want to introduce our moderator. John Hanks is a longtime NI employee working on his 18th year at National Instruments. He has helped NI grow from 40 million to nearly 800 million and has worked in many roles within the organization, ranging from application engineering to sales to product strategy and product marketing. He has a reputation for taking creative ideas, then putting them into action here at National Instruments. A couple examples are pitching the first idea of the LabVIEW Student Edition to publishers, starting NI's line of LabVIEW toolkits, launching NI's motion and motion control product lines and vision product lines, and initiating many web line product advisors. John is a Vice President of Product Marketing. Please join me in welcoming John Hanks.
Thank you very much, Hillary, for the nice introduction. About a year ago, after the last NIWeek, we were brainstorming on new ideas for this year, and we landed upon the idea of innovation. And really the idea was to create something that complemented our technical sessions. And then also when I'm approached and somebody asks about, gosh, NI's been so successful, what is in that secret sauce? Usually my response is, well, it's an innovative culture, and we're always creating new ideas, and then we take them to market, implement them. With this idea of innovation in mind, we put together a panel consisting of 2 best-selling authors on innovation, and I'll let the group introduce themselves here in a little bit, and then I've got Scott Jordan, who is one of the first 100 customers. I like to refer to him as Patient Zero. He was the first one maybe infected with the virus of LabVIEW and then spread it to other people. And if you walk into an optoelectronics lab, LabVIEW's probably there, and one of the reasons is Scott helped us get LabVIEW started into this photonics industry. And then we have Suchit Jain, who is the VP of Product Strategy for SolidWorks, and as you all know, we have Dr. T is here as well. The goal of this panel really is for you guys to walk away with a few ideas to help you in creativity and innovation in your role. And you may be a developer or an alliance partner or maybe an editor. So we hope that we can share a few ideas. And to kind of get this started, I'll start off with Dr. T and the rest of the group, and I'll ask you to give a brief introduction about yourself and then a project that you're really interested in right now and that you're working on. Go ahead.
I'm Jim Tichart, President of National Instruments, and I'm working on LabVIEW for the next 29 years.
Well, I'm Suchit Jain with SolidWorks, and I work in the Business Development Strategy Group. And my real goal really is to work with our innovation team and customers to figure out growth opportunities for SolidWorks, and more importantly, how we can solve real problems for our customers.
So my name is Andrew Hargadon. I'm a professor and author of How Breakthroughs Happen, which is a book on innovation. My research is around the recognition that most innovations are new combinations of old ideas used to solve problems they've never been applied to before. So I'm delighted to be here because it seems like that's what LabVIEW and NI seems to be enabling on a daily basis.
I'm Patty Siebold, and I'm the author of a book called Outside Innovation and a couple of other books, one called Customers.com and the other one, The Customer Revolution. So you can see there's a theme in what I do, which is let customers lead your direction. And the kind of real project that I'm working on is helping companies understand how their customers do their jobs, what their outcomes are, and how to align themselves around what customers measure in terms of their metrics of success.
I'm Scott Jordan. I'm Director of Nano Automation Technologies for Physik Instrumente, which is a German company, the market leader in the field of nano positioning, which is used in a variety of industrial and research applications. In fact, you can't make a microchip, you can't use an atomic force microscope, you can't use an optical trap to investigate the cellular basis, the molecular basis of life without LabVIEW, without our products. So there's definite intersection there. Very proud to say that I've been part of the LabVIEW ecosystem now for 21 years.
Wow, that's great.
Watching it develop.
Okay, thanks. Well, a little bit about the agenda. We're going to ask about 30, 40 minutes worth of questions, and then we'll turn it over to the audience for some questions. So please be preparing those for later on, okay? And since we have two researchers or authors that have spent a lot of time looking at examples and putting that together and have really have offered two best-selling books, I thought I'd start out with them and give us a quick insight, an overview of what you learned about innovation and what you wrote about in your book. Patty, we'll start off with you.
Sure. Well, actually, the first story in my book, Outside Innovation, is the story of Lego and National Instruments, which is how I kind of got here. I fell upon the Lego Mindstorms story of how Lego worked, actually how the whole product, the original robotics product, was designed from taking ideas of lead users at MIT and other universities who were plugging together Legos with software to allow kids to design robots so that they could learn about engineering. And then the whole story that I'm sure you're all familiar with of how that the original set of customers started hacking the product almost immediately when it came out, and Lego's reaction to that, which was, oh, this is a good thing. We're actually enabling innovation. We're enabling our customers to be inventive. Let's encourage this. And then the role of communities, of customer communities, the vibrant community and ecosystem that grew up around the Lego and the vibrant ecosystem and community that had grown up around National Instruments, and the role of the lead user, Chris Rogers at Tufts University, who has a wonderful program for teaching engineering to elementary school kids and giving them tools, who basically made the connection between National Instruments and Lego and said, you guys should work together on the next gen product so it will bridge Mac and PC in the classroom. And then watching the two companies come together and come up with a new innovative business model for how to go into a completely new market for National Instruments, the K through 12 market, out into consumer electronics, and the exciting part about having our kids be able to learn engineering by doing graphical programming, starting at a very early age, and also making sure that women, young women as well as young men, are attracted to this field. So there's so much in that story about how innovation happens that it's, I think, just a classic good example.
It's a great overview. Andy?
Sure. So I spend about as much time in historical archives as I do in modern companies. So I'll tell you a little bit about the research I've done using an old historical case. I spent a lot of time studying how companies that were continuously innovative, and one in particular was Thomas Edison's research laboratory in Menlo Park, New Jersey, which operated for about 5 years. And it was those 5 years for which we know the man. That was his inventive period. But what I spent the time studying him doing was tracking down what those ideas were before they were Edison's inventions. And in fact, it became fairly clear fairly quickly that almost every idea he generated was an idea he had taken from existing solutions in other industries. He came out of the telegraph industry and essentially brought mechatronics, the first form of mechatronics, to every other industry that didn't have it yet. A great example was a mimeograph pen that did them. And anybody older than me, maybe I got Dr. T here, knows what a mimeograph is. Everybody younger than me doesn't, but it's. But he had a pen with a needle at the tip that oscillated in and out about 100 cycles a second. He took that pen directly off of an automatic telegraph machine, added battery and wires to it, and called it a pen. And then he sold it to the mimeograph industry, and then he turned around again and sold it to the tattoo industry as a tattoo needle. And essentially, I think.
Well, we're in Austin. We know about the tattoos.
So exactly, you got that cornered. But essentially, I think the all the way down to the light bulb, which he neither invented nor really perfected, really showed that the reason we remember Edison was because he was able to put together these old elements of ideas, find them across a range of different worlds, and bring them together into a single product and make use of them. And that led to a notion of sort of innovation as a process of recombinant innovation, something I call technology brokering, and it really is about connecting across networks. And so I think, for the conversation today, one of the things that I'm fascinated by is this entire ecosystem around NI that is thousands, dozens of thousands, if not 100,000 users out there, each of whom has created something incredibly novel, but from the same basic building blocks. And not only is that fascinating from the perspective of NI enabling this kind of recombinant innovation, but also from a perspective of the untold potential it has if everybody in there who knew something was able to talk to everybody else who was working on probably what's a very similar problem in a completely different field, half the global way, which is, I think, the NI-sphere. It's like the blogosphere. So I'm really fascinated in thinking about those topics of innovation.
Well, Scott, why don't you have a comment? Go ahead.
Quick question for Andrew. The recombinant innovation. Are you saying that the lightning strike innovation doesn't happen?
Is the worst thing we could possibly be thinking of when we talk about innovation. I think now there's a lot to be said for having an idea, but what we tend to think about when we have an idea, what we tend to think about is that Edison came up with the light bulb, but we actually the first light bulb was patented 40 years before him, the first incandescent bulb. There was one burning in a laboratory 20 years before, in a laboratory he worked in 20 years before he saw it. I think we tend to think that it's called the great man theory of innovation, that there is a single idea and it happens to a single person at a single point in time. And it's a very dangerous thing because then we tend to pursue that process ourselves.
Two points that flashed to mind here from that and from reading your book. First, I've had to wrestle as I go through your book to give up or at least loosen my grip on the notion of, well, we spoke of the lightning strike of innovation. Well, you hand a creative person a tool like LabVIEW, and it's not a guarantee that there's going to be a lightning strike, but it's like walking out into a thunderstorm with a metal flagpole. They're that much more likely to take advantage of the charge of the atmosphere with a tool like that.
Right.
So I'm a little uncomfortable about that because I think it does happen. Maybe it's not universal. Maybe the great man theory has some flaws in it. Second thought is there is an appeal to what you just said. Maybe it's not part of your message. It's not what I'm saying, but we have a tendency in our society, in our media, and in our fiction, and in our history to tear great men down. And the fact of the matter is, Edison might not have invented the light bulb, but he's the one who brought it all together. He was the broker. He was the one who turned it into a business, an opportunity, a wealth generator. Does that make him less of a great man?
No. I mean, your point's well taken, and I will try not to take too much more of the stage time, but it's, we have a tendency to tear down the great men, but only after we have built them up, right? I think that's, Paris Hilton is riding that roller coaster, and I'm as happy to see her go down as anybody else. Well, but I think the issue is we tend to say, he developed it, and then take as much joy in saying he didn't. What I really want to stress is not that there is no novelty to innovation, but that the novelty tends to be in recognizing the possibility of combining things that are already out there. Yeah. And that the brilliant flash is a flash of realizing if, you got chocolate in my peanut butter. It's the realization that if I put these two things together, that's going to lead to something fundamentally different than was out there before. And it will solve my problem. So.
Well, I'll ask Dr. T the question about you've built this company with a great culture of innovation, and a few words about how do you build that into an organization where it becomes part of everyday work?
Yeah, for National Instruments, there was phases that in terms of size we were. When we were small, my favorite way of operating is very one-on-one with somebody I'm trying to stimulate to come, like Jeff or whoever, to come up with a new idea. And I'm highly iterative in that style. I'll throw out an idea, a question, and then I'll come back the next day and see if any ideas have bubbled up, and then I'll keep doing that until it's shaped.
Some of us have experienced that. Yeah.
So that's a one-on-one approach, but as we grew larger, it became clear that we had to set a framework that innovation can take place. We've got a lot of bright and talented people, and they, without some kind of a framework, they don't really have the framework to know which direction innovation should go in. So we've instituted a leadership training class which is designed to sort of set that framework, to sort of create a common language for the company so that we all speak the same language. And we can sometimes call it our MBA for virtual instrumentation. So even somebody with an MBA, it's good for them to know this concept that we work inside a constrained environment, that virtual instrumentation and LabVIEW are there, our customers are there, and innovation needs to come through that constrained environment. And that's hard for somebody just coming into the organization. So it's very important to set that framework so people are innovating in a way that they can be helpful to the goals of the organization.
Suchit, tell us a little bit about SolidWorks' culture of innovation and SolidWorks' perspective.
Right. So right now, I'll touch upon something which you guys had talked about, and then I'll answer this question. I think one of the things in innovation, we always think about innovation, and we were talking backstage, is innovation invention. And so we need to differentiate between invention and innovation. And innovation could be something which really solves a problem, and that's what we really need to find out. Does it really solve a problem? It could be invention, it could be innovation. But I tend to agree with you that, Andy, with you, that, look, invention is great, but it doesn't happen all the time. Innovation can happen a lot more if we look at the things around us, and if we can take complex things and just simplify them, that could be innovation as well. So at SolidWorks, once we figure out these things, we have this notion of what we call as absurdly ideal. And once you figure out this innovation you want to solve, think of sort of this ideal case of how you're going to solve it. And I'll give you an example of what we did with in CAD world, what we call as e-drawings, which is a product of ours. And essentially the problem in the CAD world was that once engineering gets done, to manufacture something, you have to send drawings. That's sort of the record of communication. That's how people, manufacturing production makes their designs or the actual product. Think of it as the blueprint of your house. That's what you operate from, and it gets communicated to your vendors, your guys who are going to make your products or stuff which like the tooling and things like that. So that was there. So we said, okay, e-drawings is something where we can do it electronically, but it should be 0 bytes. That was our absurdly ideal. And then we worked backwards from it, and we ended up with a very small sized file. So that's the kind of thing we talk about. First figure out what could be innovative. Is it making something complex very simple? And then to solve it, think of absurdly ideal, and don't try to think of sort of work from top towards backwards, right? So that's the way. And then the other thing I would say is that SolidWorks, it is a challenge for us. When you get a big enough, like with NI, where you have hundreds of thousands of customers, sometime innovation for ourselves. Obviously, we have to help our customers innovate, but also how do we come up with innovative products ourselves? It's been a challenge, and as you said, using a common language within the company is important as well. Putting a framework for innovation. Otherwise, you just get caught up with sustainable stuff, which you're just working with your customers all.
Patty, I think you had a
I wanted to build
comment
on what Sujit said about the absurdly ideal, and also build in that framework idea that we were talking about, framework for innovation. So there's a framework for innovation and creativity that I have seen. Most of you are very familiar with it. You may not have thought about it this way, but it's kind of the basis of the creative process, which is you get a very firm understanding of current reality, how things are today, what you like and don't like. And you have a vision of what it is you want, ideally, the absurdly ideal. And it's the structural tension between those and keeping that tension structural and not emotional or psychological that actually propels a group of people or an individual to innovate, to create. It's kind of the principles of creativity. Now, we've used this framework, most of us in business, many times for visioning meetings and so on. I want to give you a very quick example of that framework being used in a very different setting. In rural Africa, there's a village called Kagadi in rural Uganda, western Uganda, in which this framework was brought in by locals who had studied the creative process, and they began to go into the villages and meet with all the elders and all of the women and the kids and the men and talk to them about, well, what do you have and what do you want in your lives? And this, you know, I have to visualize, you know, this is a part of the world with no electricity, no clean water, you know, very, very rural and basic. And that was 20 years ago. And what's happened is that from that structural tension they began to build and educate people about. They built an educational institution that does very unique integrated grassroots rural development. They now have, the town is now gone from 3,000 people to 50,000 people. It has very vibrant businesses. It has a hospital with 100 beds. They have internet access. They have, most interesting, a girls' school, a girls' boarding school with 300 girls who have been brought in from villages at the age of 12. And what they learn is an integrated rural development methodology that they have developed, which includes health and nutrition and sanitation and organic farming and appropriate technologies, all of which were kind of co-developed by the villagers as they thought about, well, what's the next thing we need? What's the next thing they need? And finally, kind of the current state is these young women go back to their villages and they teach their families and their communities how to do all these things, and they become the transformation leaders in the communities. So they've actually enabled rural transformation by empowering the women, and now they're taking it to the next step with a university level program. So always from that same framework, creative, the current reality, the vision, and then how do we get there? How do we figure out how to get there?
Interesting process. Dr. T, and then after
Yes.
Dr. T, I'll ask, there's been a lot of discussion about Web 2.0 and the community, and there seems to be this value in the innovation process of connecting customers that have knowledge, and how does that help in the innovation process?
Well, I'd like to comment on absurdly ideal first, because I would say LabVIEW was a product of an absurdly ideal approach, because we said, what do scientists and engineers do? They work with instruments with front panels, and kind of absurd thought back in 1983 for what DOS-based, text-based PCs did. And then they draw signal diagrams on the board when they want to describe an experiment. That was an absurdly ideal idea because it really was way, way away from traditional basic and text-based programming. And Jeff modified it to make it computationally rigorous. And that's basically all that was to that idea, is two absurdly ideal ideas and then applied practicality. So I would say LabVIEW is definitely in that flavor, and it came out as something totally different that would be about 20 years ahead of its time in any other discipline in terms of computer science. So I'd say it was a good example of the absurdly ideal. Back to the 2.0, well, we've, over the last 10 years, 12 years or so, been very, very aggressive users of the web. And one of the reasons is that we have such a diverse base of customers, but they have common interests around the globe. A researcher working on a particular subject in one country will be interested in the technology or the research going on everywhere else in the world. So we have a natural environment where it makes a lot of sense for information to be shared. And so, you know, there was a while, unfortunately, when it was easier to go to Google or some other search engine to find out what we were doing than our own website. So that became one of my goals, was to solve that problem, that we at least internally knew what was going on. So now we want to work both internally, where everybody's learning what our customers are doing, and on any topic you can quickly search for it. And then externally, getting environments where people can share this information, because every time two people are doing the same thing, they ought to, at least, unless they're competitors, they ought to be able to know about each other's work. So a very, very important leverage point in creating these communities where this can take place is critical for efficiency in the end. And the more we can do that, the better we can do it, the better we can advance the cause of our customers.
Personally, I feel sometimes a concern that our customers are often replicating the same application over and over again. And then there seems to be this opportunity of how we somehow incentivize them to connect. And there's a couple of models out there. You could use the recognition model, or you can, you know, express some value in some other way. And I know Andy and you and I were talking about that. Maybe you have a few comments.
Yeah, actually, it's a perfect segue. I think one of the, you know, following up on the absurdly ideal challenge and Web 2.0, a lot of, so there is Web 2.0, the reality, and then there is Web 2.0. I spend a lot of time with venture capitalists, and there's Web 2.0, the thing you put in your elevator pitch as to what makes your business profitable is it's going to be a Web 2.0 business. Actually, we're on to 3.0 now. But in any case, there's this notion that, in fact, Web 2.0 and user contribution is going to help the company. And I think one of the absurdly ideal challenges that companies ought to take on is it's a very simple and seemingly semantic switch, but to move from thinking, how do I make, you know, your name here, you know, how do I make National Instruments more innovative, to how do I make NI's customers more innovative?
Right.
And now all of a sudden it's less about a new product and more about making, you know, I don't know how the audience is split here, but making the people who use LabVIEW or, you know, use CompactReal to all of a sudden be able to do more than they could do before in less time than it took them to do it before. And what are the mechanisms, what are the underlying product features, business features, community features that make them more innovative? And so I think now that comes back, and what Web 2.0 really is, and the reason people participate in it is because they can be innovative. They can put up a blog. They can post a comment to a company. They can have a voice. They can make a difference. They can show their source code. They can, you know, learn other people's. It's the focus on not the customer or the customer's contribution to the company,
Right.
but rather the customer's ultimate performance and innovation that really then gives them the value and the incentive to participate.
Scott, you're participate in our community. What are your thoughts about how we can get the customers to share the value between each other, and have you thought about that problem?
I have a very good example from my own work in the past few weeks. At PI, we've recently developed a new technology on which patents are pending, which allow us to move a specimen that's being measured by the atomic force microscope with a much flatter trajectory than was previously possible. And what this allows us to do is take AFMs, atomic force microscopes, to the next level, particularly in industrial metrology, because semiconductor chips, microelectronic devices need to be measured in order for the processes that make them to be controlled. This takes it to the next level. So we have this brand new piece of equipment, and I needed to demonstrate it to some customers and plug it into their equipment and make it work. In order to do that, I needed to essentially build an atomic force microscope and generate some data with it to show the benefits of the capability. Naturally, I turned to LabVIEW to do that. Now, getting to the topic of recombinant innovation and community support and mashing things together, to use a Web 2.0 term, I needed to take this swarm of data points, this three-dimensional image that my AFM was making, and find the mean plane that cut through that so I could subtract it, leaving out the hills and valleys, making them dominant in the resulting graph. The math to do a plane fit through that type of data is non-trivial, and it was giving me a headache. So I turned to Google, put in plane fit lab view, up popped a few hits. One of them was from an ophthalmology researcher at UCLA by the name of Christian Altenbach. Christian, if you're out there, thank you very much for your sub-VI, because it did exactly what I wanted to do and allowed my customers to benefit from seeing this technology and what it could do, allowed my company to benefit because I was out there in the field with this instrument earlier than I could have otherwise.
Is that the simple answer, is search? Has SolidWorks kind of thought about how to get the community to share and help them each to innovate in their own way?
Well, search is a big thing, definitely, because, as you said, if you can connect to people who are either trying to figure some problem out, as you described, or even a business process. I think business process innovation is great for our customers as well, because it necessarily doesn't have to be, in the first get-go, I want to make this product better, because, look, if I can make my process better, I can make the cheaper product, and then maybe I can put more money into R&D to do more stuff with my product. So I think one of the things we also look at, beyond the tool, SolidWorks is just a tool to enable people to do their innovations and designs and so on. But beyond the tool, SolidWorks tool, we also try to think of how we can enable this community of people, or social network, or whatever you may call it, between engineers, but also between engineers and vendors, for example. So if I'm making a product for manufacturing, how do I get the suppliers in contact with these guys who may have some innovative ways of manufacturing, which are maybe cheaper, or maybe the quality of my product would be better. So all those things, we're trying to think of how we can, put the suppliers along with a small company, a small machine builder who needs to outsource manufacturing, and not necessarily offshore, but even outsource it.
Are they incentivized to do that? The suppliers? The suppliers, are they really incented to do that?
Right. So then the question is, where's the business model? Will the suppliers do it? I think so, right? I mean, what are suppliers looking for? They're looking for business. Now, if I'm not a Flextronics or a Selectron, and if I'm a small manufacturer, a small mold shop or something, how do I get known? Right? I can put up my website, but people are not going to come to it. So that's where companies like SolidWorks can help, though, because they are our customers as well. And the guy who needs a mold shop. So we try to put these two guys together. And that,
Patty?
Yeah, so building on the whole kind of Web 2.0, coming up with a framework to incent people to share their great ideas. One of my favorite examples is what Lawrence Lessig has done for industry after industry, starting with Creative Commons and then going into Science Commons and all these other commons, where he's basically, I think, as a lawyer, thought carefully about what matters to us when we share our intellectual property or our ideas, and coming up with a very basic, simple framework that you see on Flickr, you see lots of places where I can share something with no attribution, but most people don't do that. They share something and they put their name on it, right? Mm-hmm. I can share it and allow derivative works as long as you say that it was my stuff that you're building on. I can also specify whether you can take my stuff, build on it, and get money for it commercially. Mm-hmm. And so each of those levels is very explicitly put out there, and then as a user, you just basically say where you want to play. And what I find is that level of respect and the ability to have that kind of granularity around how people use their ideas is a really good one. And then coming back to the how do you harness customer communities and your ecosystem, I also wanted to mention another approach. You were talking about business process innovation and so on. And one of the things I'd also like to bring up is the idea of focusing on your customers' business process for getting things done, which I think we all instinctively, everybody in this room does. But thinking about it in terms of the ecosystem that's involved in helping a customer actually achieve their outcome. And one of the most fun that we have is bringing together lead customer communities physically of very smart people who are passionate about stuff, who have similar business processes or problems to solve, and getting them to work with their suppliers and their partners to co-design what they want the right solutions to be. And again, great minds coming together, working together physically, as well as the online community things.
And you've written about the ecosystem that we've talking about that, about Apple's iPod and iTunes, and maybe you could share with us some lessons learned about the innovation that went into developing that ecosystem.
Oh, and I think speaking of that, I think one of the issues that tends to be forgotten around innovation is, I mean, yet another piece of it is the notion of the better mousetrap, and the idea that if you create a great idea, it's going to happen, which is sort of tautologically supported by the fact that if it doesn't happen, it must not have been a good idea. But too many times, I mean, it's the death knell in companies when somebody says, "Oh, that was tried before. You know, we tried that 5 years ago. Our competitors tried that 3 years ago." And people tend not to give enough credit to the particular way in which it was tried, just the right combination, because the same product, if it shuts off the opportunity for value-added resellers to come in and really profit by getting involved, will not succeed, where just a slight tweak in the design might actually make it possible for VARs to get a whole lot out of participating. And so I mean, particularly Apple's iPod is a great example of trying to design, you know, given that particular moment in time, trying to design a system that would allow the record labels to get involved. And I think one of the best design features of the iPod is the digital rights management system that turned the record companies from suing college kids to putting their digital, you know, their songs online. And I think that's a lot of when we think about innovation, we need to remember that the innovation itself is a network. It's a network not just of the manufacturer and the product and the customer, but also the value-added resellers and the suppliers and anybody else who participates in any other way to it. And the design choices you make in making an innovation are the ones that determine whether those other people in the system will benefit and thus be drawn into participating in your world, or will not and thus sort of stay away. And so I think that's one of the pieces that I think is really probably really important to attend to here, is the extent to which you know, NI's products or anybody else's who's out there actually builds a community that other people can prosper in.
Dr. T, sometimes it seems that, and I will pick an area that may seem to be a little underappreciated, and we innovate in that area, and maybe even mundane, let's say driver software. And there's this idea of, if we can pick an area where there's not motivation by others or knowledge to really innovate and do that well, we can create an advantage. Maybe you have a couple examples or some thoughts about that?
Well, when we introduced LabVIEW, we also introduced a framework for a network for instrument drivers. And the motivation was to reach back to the install base of instruments as a platform for us to build our business on. And certainly that was a key success factor, because the customer will always relate to what they have. And so you always have to look at the baseline that you're working from and then try to build on top. And the instrument driver network was a very good example of that. We're working that again with our IPNet. It's a little bit different flavor, but same concept, that create an environment that people can share, they can build on, they can pull from, so that you start with the baseline that's in the marketplace.
We've all kind of touched on some areas here about using customer feedback, and I have some risk here in making this statement, and that this is a customer forum. Is there risk becoming too close to your customers on the innovation process? What's your thoughts and opinions about that? Scott, I'll go ahead and start with you.
Well, I think that if you say to yourself, here's a customer that's some large percentage of our business, say 30% of the business, 40%, 50%, that's a perilous thing. If you're listening only to that customer, then you're making the assumption that that customer represents the market, and that's an impossibility. So yes, I would say there's a risk in doing that. This seems like a good question for the expert in lead customers here.
Well, I mean, I got interested in lead customers and early adopters, which most of you are. That's why you're here. Because I found, I wouldn't say that all innovation is customer-driven or should be customer-driven. Obviously, there's a lot of visionary work and modeling that we can do without them. But the difference between having your most profitable or your biggest customer drive your strategy and having a group of very smart, insightful, visionary lead customers have a strong influence on what problems they're trying to solve and what tools and resources they need to be able to solve those problems, and paying attention to that and giving them the innovation toolkits, as Eric von Hippel would say. A great example of that being LabVIEW, to be able to design their own innovations, as Andrew points out, is really a great way to unleash that lead customer community. I mean, they're not going to steer you wrong because you're giving them the tools to do what they want to do, and it's not going to damage your business in any way. And what you're going to get from it is incredible insights and probably go off in new directions that you would never have thought of on your own. I think the danger is to follow the customers who are the ones with the biggest pocketbook, or the ones who yell the loudest, or the ones who gripe the most, as opposed to the ones that are really insightful and visionary. And that's tricky. That's why we talk about lead customers as being really important.
Dr. T, you want to get a comment in here?
The attitude you bring to that conversation is important as well. You have to be receptive. You have to resist the temptation to strangle people who have messages that you might not want to hear.
Go ahead.
I think the concept of absurdly ideal contradicts just getting random broad-based feedback from your customer base. Obviously, the innovator's dilemma speaks to that too. You tend to get driven up the performance curve and feature curve as opposed to the new idea that will change the rules in the marketplace. So I think it's some kind of a balance. Obviously, you want continuous improvement on your products and you want to get that feedback and use it. But in looking out after the best interest of your customers, you have to step out of that framework sometimes and look at the bigger pictures and see if that absurdly idea may be really the one that can best serve your customer.
Okay, well, in just a few minutes, we'll be taking questions from the audience, so get your questions ready. Scott, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just had to comment on something that Dr. T said over there. It's been my observation over the years that the truly successful companies, the enduring ones, successful companies eat their young. They are willing to tear down what they have done and build on new foundations based on what the customers are telling them, based on a sense of humbleness in the marketplace. You mentioned instrument drivers also earlier as being an example of sharing with customers and enabling customers. And that, from my own experience, that was one of the original attractions for LabVIEWs, that we could accomplish several things. First, we could differentiate our products in the early days when we were the first ones that had instrument drivers. Secondly, we could really help our customers get to market with their designs or to publication with their research. Thirdly, we would reduce our support costs by having a common frame of reference and a common language with our customers who are increasingly global. Let's face it.
Great. Let's see, Hillary, do we have a microphone? We could have some questions. We have a question from the audience in the back. Okay, while we're getting the microphone, I'll go ahead and ask another question and move on here. In that, I know at National Instruments we have some fairly simple things that have big impact that help our innovation process. And one of them, working with Dr. T, talks about finding the real breakthrough on page 10 of Google. And so I thought I would go through the panel here and a few tips and techniques that are maybe that are simple, but really have helped you in your innovation process. And we've started to call this deep Googling at NI, where we go in a little bit deeper than the top page to get the right information. Dr. T, you have any?
Sure. Well, I think Andy already talked about it, that most ideas have already been invented, and so you better be sure that you found all the previous inventions out there. And another important part is to use pattern matching. Something that worked in this industry or this application can be transposed into another area. And so in your Googling, you need to use a lot of creativity. Matter of fact, I've come to look at Google, using Google sort of like a slot machine. You type in the magic words and you pull the lever and up comes the magic answer.
Yeah.
And so you kind of get addicted to that after a while. You know, you come up with these things, gee, will this get the answer, and you go pull the lever to see. I mean, it's just sort of like gambling.
Sushit?
Yeah, I think it's important to differentiate between problems and solutions. So, once you get a problem you need to solve, we can go into the solutions, and lead users and so on are very helpful. But one of the things we are doing, actually we are currently in the process at SolidWorks, is we go back to the basic question. When we go to the customers, we are very careful in asking them what they want. Because if you ask a simple question, is what you want, you probably get an answer of, I want this feature better, or, and an example of, a simple example could be, if I go to our customers, they'd say, well, I need a better weld features, to weld these things together. And the question is, what do you really, why do you want to weld? And what are you trying to weld? And then it comes out that they really want a better way to join things. And in that process of joining, you may come up with a better way. And welding is a solution of joining two things. So really, what we try to do is really go to our customers and figure out what, I think you mentioned in the beginning, is to try to get back to what jobs they're trying to solve.
Right.
And what are they trying to really achieve, and asking a lot of why is good. And then you will get to the deep problem, and if you can identify the problem, then you can find the absurdly ideal solutions and so on from there on.
Great. Andy, do you want to add in your...
So I will briefly throw my seconds and thirds onto that notion. I think one of the easiest things we can do, and one of the last things we tend to actually do, is if you've got a problem, sit down somewhere and just write out a list of the 5 different industries that are probably dealing with a similar problem. And then you go and you chase those down. But if you haven't done that, don't bother trying to solve the problem on your own, because you're recreating the wheel.
So go look outside of your core industry and
look
find
look outside,
answer.
and there's I guarantee you there are at least 5 who are already solving the problem you're facing.
Okay, I think we have the mics ready now. Open it up for questions. I think we've got a question here. Is it Michael Doms has a question?
I think I'm with National Instruments since 1990. We are a public company since 95, so we've created great culture and we maintained it, but we have financial constraints being a public company. At what point we should be considering setting up a subsidiary or a profit loss center to really be creative outside the financial constraints, or we go with the Porsche approach and just release financial earnings once a year and still be successful? Is that the consideration?
So is that question for Dr. T then?
Yeah,
or is that for Patty?
Okay. Yeah, or the consultants to probably help us find the answer to that question.
Just a little accounting point. Setting up a subsidiary doesn't change the financial rules, because if you own more than own it, you still got to report the financials as subsidiary. I think you always live in a constrained environment, and so in some ways the key is to not only live with the constraints but take advantage of them to my best decisions, innovation comes when I'm backed against the wall. So if you don't have a wall that you're backed against, maybe you're not going to get to the best point. So for me, it's really about being in a position where I need to come up with something to solve a problem, a create a solution in a certain area. And so in my case, I don't think the fact that we're a public company is the reasons we don't get more innovation than we do. I think it's more about, are we really maximizing the opportunity for innovation?
Okay, good question. I'll open it up for more questions. Okay.
Hi, I'm Deirdre Walsh, the LabVIEW Community Specialist here at National Instruments. And my question is, how do you measure a successful ecosystem? What kind of things do you do at SolidWorks or with the authors are you seeing in terms of metrics that companies are reporting?
I'll jump in on that one. I think you measure a successful ecosystem on both the, the number of participants, the vibrancy, i.e. the amount of interactions among them, but probably even more important, the economic benefits they're each deriving from participating in that ecosystem. So if it's a group of customers, of scientists and engineers who are sharing information and coming up with solutions to each other's problems, I mean, you gave us a great example, Scott did, of how that saved him weeks of research and time and effort. So that quid pro quo for customers, I think, is really important. And then the partners in the community, in the ecosystem, the ability for them to actually innovate and make money by coming up with new ideas and serving that community and benefiting from it. So I think it really does come down to kind of standard business metrics around, are you helping people solve their problems? Are you helping them reach their outcomes? Are you saving them time in getting the things done that they care about doing? And are you creating kind of not an exhaust, but a cloud, a virtuous circle of increasing returns for all of the participants?
Furthermore, time is money. LabVIEW is a rapid development application, or a rapid development environment. Now it is served by this ecosystem that we're speaking of that helps make its participants that much more speedy in what they do. Companies like myself, we were able to get this new groundbreaking new product in front of customers more quickly than we could have otherwise, with more confidence than we could have otherwise, because we were able to quickly throw things together and mash technologies from ophthalmology into this application to solve the problem that we needed. So that's an example of where it benefited us directly, because time is money. For our customers who use LabVIEW, it lets them get to market more quickly, which very often is a very definite metric of success in technology fields.
We'll have a series of compare and contrast type questions here to kind of to make it a little bit more controversial, and I'll start off with you, Scott. In that you work for a European company and you're American. Is there a difference between the way Europeans and Americans innovate? And you're up against the wall, like Dr. T was talking about earlier. So.
Well, as they say in some parts of Europe, vive la différence. It's very beneficial that people think differently in different places, in different localities, because innovation comes in different forms, and it comes from different directions, and it comes from different places. So I'm very fortunate in that PI is a very fast-paced, very customer-connected company, both of which are generally regarded as almost American, because we're American traits, that is to say, because we Americans are the cowboys, we're the risk takers. Well, PI takes, it does a very good job of innovating, taking risks in that way. So I don't know if that speaks for all Europeans, but importantly for this discussion is that LabVIEW is a language that I can speak with my colleagues in Germany and with our customers in Japan and other places. It makes the world smaller.
That's an interesting observation. It's an important language between continents, between people of different languages. Patty, I'll ask a similar question for you. Is you're the female on the panelist here. Do females and males? Is there a different innovation process that they go through? Or is it the same?
What I find is that by combining men and women together or boys and girls together, you do get, it's the same kind of thing as having, the French, the Germans, and the Italians all working together. You need that balance. It is true that there are often times in the work that I've done with young women, for example, that they often feel that they want to work together on things without having the competition of the guys on that project. So I think you can kind of do both, and we see that in the first robotics world, in the first Lego League, for example, where there are teams of just girls working together on the robotics competition, and then there are teams that are boys and girls working together. So I think you can kind of benefit from both. Do we have different approaches to things? Yeah, probably, certainly. Are they complementary? Absolutely.
Yeah. Great, okay. I saw another question out there, and I'll open it back up for questions.
Sorry, it's a little bit of a weird question. Don't you need a set of people or a group of companies who need to do things regularly, a regular way, not innovative way? Only then can somebody be innovative. Meaning if everybody is doing things innovatively, then what is innovation? I mean, do you need to have some companies doing things non-innovatively?
Oh, that's a good question.
Well, what comes to mind for me is kind of the analogy of the red ocean and the blue ocean. If everybody was trying to serve the blue ocean or where there's a lot of innovation, then that differentiation makes it very interesting in the marketplace. So,
I mean, business process innovation is all about that, right? I mean, you're trying to, you rightly said, red ocean, blue ocean, but I mean, like Circus du Soleil in the book, they talk about it, right? I mean, everybody was about doing animals and, expensive acrobats and so on, and Circus du Soleil came up with a different business model there. So I think differentiation in that business model, and goes back to, what is innovation? Again, if you define innovation as invention, then it's a different story. It's not always about coming up with a new product, but business process. I'll give you an example. Today, I'm sure NI faces this challenge, and SolidWorks and a lot of other companies is, how do we sell in emerging countries? How do we sell more products? Because there's as economies are becoming global, there's a huge demand coming from those market spaces. But the price structure, value structure is very different, right? So for us, in that perspective, the companies have to innovate either by coming up with better pricing, better ways of delivering products, or even maybe in a software business, how do we provide them access to software, maybe hosting service, or maybe a different licensing model, I don't know what, but so I think we have to look at that as well, different process models. Yeah.
One thing we haven't talked a lot about is personality and innovation. And I think, some people are naturally rebellious. They want to rebel against this, or maybe Steve Jobs is a prototype example, I don't know, but rebel against the status quo. And so that obviously leads that personality to a blue ocean because they want to do it different. So I think that is a factor in personality and looking at marketplace, and I don't want to do it the same way everybody else does it. I want to come up with something that's distinctly different, and I want to put my brand on that.
Is that your personality, Dr. T? A little rebellious?
I don't know, a little bit maybe, but also persistent in some point of view.
Okay, we have time for one more question. I have a wrap-up question for everybody on the panel. The question over here.
During the discussion, I've come up with an idea myself, and I'd like to ask the members of the panel whether they consider this a lightning strike of an innovation, or whether it's an innovation that brings together technologies that we already have, and indeed how long it might be before we see such an innovation. And the innovation question is that, in my mind, I have a vision of a machine that I would like to develop. I have something around my neck that's actually measuring my thoughts on how this mechanical machine driven by an electromechanical system might work, and the computer is interpreting my thoughts and placing the design not only into the system but actually manufacturing it as well. Thank you very much.
Great overview.
You want to comment?
I was going to round out the session here with the question specifically about National Instruments and LabVIEW. You're experts in innovation and product strategy and have worked with LabVIEW and know our community. What suggestions would you give to National Instruments about where to innovate and where the opportunities are? And Scott, I'll start with you. And Dr. T, you're the final one there. So.
Okay. I would encourage NI to keep doing. If you look at the grand sweep of what NI has been doing over the past decade or two, 2.1, you've been going from enabling me to do good things and my customers to do good things with a computer. And now you've taken that downstream to things like Compact Rio. Keep going. Yeah.
Keep going. Down the deployment curve is what I heard. What we call the swoosh internally. So, Patty?
So, I think there are a couple of things that you're doing already that I'm going to just point to and say keep on in that direction, and then tell you kind of why I think those are important. One is the NI Labs thing that was mentioned this morning. That's something we didn't really talk about, but I think in response to one of the questions about how do public companies, how should public companies invest in innovation? One of the things that I see a lot of companies doing is actually following the lead of Google and others, where you take kind of half-baked intellectual property and ideas and tools, you put them out in a place where any customer or partner or college student or whatever can get their hands on them, roll up their sleeves, and start doing things with them. And that's where we get all these Google Earth mashups, and I've seen this be very successful in companies as diverse as a very highly regulated financial company like Fidelity. There's now a Fidelity Labs. You can go look them up. You can go play with financial instruments that they may never actually deliver to the world, but they're experimenting with by putting them out there and letting you play with them. So this whole idea of kind of letting customers take things and run with them, I think is a great way to continue your innovation. And then the other is that I see coming out of Mindstorms, which is now the Lego National Instruments connection and using LabVIEW software with a kid-friendly user interface, but under the covers it's full LabVIEW to do Lego robotics kinds of things. My thought is, well, why limit it to Lego robotics? There are many other things in the real world that we want to program and model and work on. So I would encourage you to kind of take that direction and keep going with it, particularly in the education market, because I think getting these tools, getting a whole new way of graphically relating to the world and modeling the world and making things happen in the world to a whole new generation of customers has got to be a really good growth strategy.
All right, that's a tough to follow those suggestions. I agree with all of them. So, on top of that, I would say, just to be provocative, I would focus on, what's the true value proposition? What's the true value users get out of NI's products? Not in terms of the the product itself, but rather the problem that they're facing and how much NI's products solve that problem, and how much else they have to go and find on their own to do that. And try and figure out the ways in which you can capture more of that not necessarily monetize more of that, but supply more of that, help enable more of that. And then so it's again, I think, at the risk of being repetitive here, it's thinking about what is it about if they're trying to solve a problem with finding a plane out of a cloud of data, it's making it easier than Google to find the people within the NI ecosystem that have already solved that problem.
Easier than Google.
Easier than them turning to Google to find that problem, because I think they could, it's.
Well, I think there's a challenge there inherent sometimes is that our customers don't often know what they're looking for within the National Instruments portfolio of products or samples that are out there.
What I'd say, they don't know what they're looking for, but they'll know it when they see it.
Yeah.
And that's a big difference. And I think, I'm not saying that because I know NI, but because I've seen it elsewhere. It's the customer is the best person to know when a solution will help them or not. And trying to get in the middle of that with, well, here are the keywords by which you will find your solutions is dangerous, because ultimately if you can just give them enough exposure to the other solutions that other people are doing. On a related incident, I work with doctoral students across our campus, which is it's a large state university, but inevitably when I bring them together, they immediately start sharing, oh, what reagents are you using? Well, what equipment are you using? Really? Well, where'd you get that? And, oh, geez, I wonder, could I get some time on that? And even within a single university, sometimes within a single college, there's so much to be gained by sharing what seem like mundane tips and tricks, that to overlook that and say, no, we're selling you the equipment. Everybody's going to be up on the same page and able to use it in the same way is leaving a lot on the table, leaving a lot of the value of what these guys are trying to solve on the table.
Thanks.
Well, everything has been said. I'll just say maybe a couple of more things which are not touched upon. One is maybe something about internal. We talked a lot about outside innovation, and obviously, there are a lot of smart people within the company. So putting a framework where not a real framework, because every company says they are they encourage innovation, but there are very few actually put a framework for internal innovation encouragement, and where people know that they have a place to go, they have a forum. One thing we do at SolidWorks, and we need to do a lot better job at it, but we call it Innovation Fridays, and we do every month one Innovation Friday where anybody who has an idea gets to present, and then we take that idea, and the following Monday we have executive meeting where that idea is discussed, whether to fund it, not fund it, and then somebody's assigned a head is assigned and a time frame is assigned as to come back to that person and say whether it's we're going to look into it further or not. So this way people get immediate response internally from it as well, and then more people get encouraged to do it. So that's one thing which I think will help. And the other thing is obviously, what we have found working with NI as SolidWorks, I think that has revealed a lot of things for us. And we always talk about, whenever I talk with the NI person and mention a customer, they say, well, it's our customer as well. And we didn't know that, and you didn't know that, and our customers didn't know that, because what's happening is there are different departments. So we talk about mechatronics a lot, and there's electrical guys within the same company who's using NI, LabVIEW, or whatever, and mechanical guys using SolidWorks, and they never talk to each other. So those kind of innovations don't happen within those companies. But now we, as together spreading this message, is helping our customers realize what more they can do. So I think we need to do much more of that. Not maybe you don't need to do with other companies as well in different domains.
So what I heard there is that we should do more seminars together so we can share our customers and share innovations.
Right.
Great. Dr. T?
Well, I think, as you grow as a company, you have to formalize things that weren't formalized in the past, and those can be barriers to innovation. We really don't have a very formal way to talk about funding of new ideas. It's very informal, and I think that'll be a challenge as we grow to be able to keep that informality, to be receptive to new ideas, while having mechanisms to not just go off and do crazy things. So I think that is one of our challenges going forward, the ability to grow and keep an informality, yet we know we're going to have more structure. I still, are very engaged in many of the ideas we're working on. So as we go beyond needing more formality in the funding of these things, I think it could be a major thing for us to work through.
Scott.
I have a related question to the one that got us going here. The question that we just went through was, what should you guys be doing in the future? What looking forward is the correct path? But we all know that sometimes innovation doesn't happen for all the wrong reasons. So the flip side of that question, it really comes out of my own background, because my first LabVIEW-based patent, in fact, the first LabVIEW-based patent, nearly got me fired, because it just was too much for the organization, and specifically my boss, to accept. So there are ways that innovation can be strangled in its crib through no fault of its own or of the innovator. What are those ways? What should National not do in the future? Question for our two experts on innovation here.
Well, there's another way to kind of put that. Can you over-innovate, right? And what are the signs of over-innovation?
Yeah, well, I mean, the squashing of ideas, and Andrew brought it up, the idea that, somebody else had that idea and it didn't work, or we tried that before and it didn't work, or, well, you can't do this because it breaks our business model, or it's giving away too much of our proprietary information, or it's scary to us in some way because it's outside our business model. I mean, those are the kinds of things I see all the time as companies kind of internally protect themselves as organisms, And the one thing that I've seen, again, come back to my customer theme, is that even though sometimes this happens inevitably, that good ideas get shot down, the companies that I've seen be persistently energetic and vibrant and open to new ideas are the ones where customers' innovations and customers' stories are what everybody lives for. It's part of the culture that we're kind of bathed in, oh, look at the great things our customers are doing with our products, and look at the different ways that they've used those. If you have a culture that does that, then it's much less likely that you're going to have that internal kibosh put on products. There's something about that outside energy flowing through and being amplified by the stories that I think really does work culturally.
That would seem to say that not invented here syndrome is an indication.
Yeah,
that,
right.
Okay.
Where to begin on that question? It's a lot easier to find out what companies do wrong than what they do right. So that's. There's a couple things though that do come up. One of which is, to your point about over-innovation. It's very dangerous when a company's trying to innovate to fund a lot of projects, because what it allows you to do is feel like you're innovating without committing to any one. And either you're not funding any one project enough, or you're funding them all enough and wasting a lot of money. But either way, you're preventing yourself from saying, we are going to go here. And, innovation is, 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. It's also 99% commitment. I think usually if you decide that's what you're going to do, you're going to do it well. And if you don't, then you won't. I think the next problem that I think is most common in organizations is actually a process problem, which is the tendency to want to, as they say, give birth to an 18-year-old. We don't simply want to put a new product out there. We want to put a new product out there that graduated valedictorian from high school, is going to Princeton, and was captain of the football team and the soccer team. Rather than putting a new product out and saying, well, this is, I'm sure, I don't know, but I will bet $1 million that LabVIEW started out as essentially, well, we don't know exactly where this is going to go, but we hope we'll get one customer out of it, and then we hope we'll get another. Whereas once a company gets big and their expectations, particularly around breakthrough products, you don't hope for one customer. You hope for 1 million, 1,000 customers. You hope for $1 million a month or $10 million a month, and then $100 million a year. And immediately you set expectations that are so high that they both skew the development process itself, and they completely undermine the possibility of success.
Here's a question for Dr. T. LabVIEW gestated back when NI was a private company. Could LabVIEW happen in a publicly held National Instruments?
I would say it depends. Just as a data point, we were a $2.5 million in sales company when we started LabVIEW development. And it would cost us $10 million of investment before we made a profit on LabVIEW. So to some extent, you'd have to answer that. Sounds, if that's the only thing we're doing, no. But if it's a new area, which we can keep the 18-year-old syndrome, and I fully agree with that. That's where the idea of crossing the chasm comes in. That process where you can start small with a small entity with the intention of ultimately being big. When we did Compact Rio and the FPGA, I kind of sandbagged a little bit the organization and the fact that I didn't really tell them what I thought the real scope of this project was, the opportunity. And it was only now that I'm really letting it out that I really had intentions that this be a very big thing. And because if I'd done that, then everybody expect the 18-year-old, which didn't exist. And so having mechanisms to deal with that is very important. So that's certainly a problem a big company, I would claim one of the reasons we did not have any effective, real effective competition, instrumentation software is everybody expected to come out with an 18-year-old, and they couldn't do it. It wasn't possible. The innovation was too high. On the point of commitment to cause, I agree with that. And that's a challenge for me right now, as we mentioned, the 9 more years of LabVIEW. We got the long-term view. You saw it this morning with the system diagram and the things we want to add to make LabVIEW do these things. Then you have these short-term things that can be valuable incrementally, and you need to balance between those two. If you don't, the short-term things will just kind of overwhelm the long-term because you can get some revenue next year. And so that's certainly on my plate and something I'm very hands-on in terms of, because it's so important to keep that strategic focus in the midst of the things that can come up. And I fully agree on customer success. I think you see a lot of that here, and certainly we try to champion successes. The first thing I do when an engineer is working on a project and we got that first customer success, I'm running in excitedly talking about it, champion that success, because it's so important to give positive feedback at that point. So customer success at the start of the project, customer success when you have LabVIEW where it is now, is critical to really build the morale, build a sense of momentum in a certain direction that you want to go.
Great. We just have a few minutes left, and I thought I would leave that open so that you could come up and ask one-on-one questions. But I wanted to thank the industry panel and our experts on innovation. Thank you very much for leading this session. Appreciate it. And at this time, if you want to come up and talk to the panel, we'll have more one-on-one type discussions. Thank you very much.